busy schedule, so we are going to start our hearings today. Welcome to House Economic Matters. We're going to start with House Bill 1547. Madam Speaker, please.
Chair Wilson, where's your vice chair?
I will chastise it later.
In his absence, Vice Chair Crosby and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, I'm Speaker Adrian Jones, and I'm here today to testify in support of House Bill 1547. Maryland has always been a leader in protecting and supporting victims of domestic violence. This legislation builds on our efforts by incorporating domestic violence awareness training into the licensure requirements for barbers and cosmetologists. We all know the statistics, but behind every number is a person and an individual story. And because hair salons are among the few places victims can visit alone, these stories are often told to our hairdressers and barbers. That's why this bill matters. HB 1547 ensures barbers and cosmetologists complete a 1-hour training program developed by the Maryland Department of Labor. The training will help them recognize signs of domestic violence, start conversations with compassion and care, listen in a way that builds trust, and connect clients to resources that can help them escape abuse. We know that domestic violence hinges on control and isolation. In fact, I myself have experienced this isolation in my own life and witnessed firsthand just how devastating domestic violence can be. No one should have to feel that way. And this legislation will continue our work to build support networks for domestic violence victims so they can never be standing alone. Thank you, and I request a favorable report on House Bill 1547.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, as I understand, the bill is just allowing other individuals to be taught and understand the domestic violence and how to recognize issues and how to report them. Thank you very much for the presentation. I don't see any questions, and thank you very much, ma'am.
All right. Thank you.
We'll move on to our next bill.
Mr. Chair, there is some written testimony that I'm just going to follow up with the committee with just to make sure it's in the bill file.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have some, but some more would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we have Delegate Johnson with House Bill 960, another big storage bill.
Huge. Mr. Chair, can I bring up my
Please bring up your panel. And do you have a virtual panel as well, or just?
I do. I think I do.
Peltler? Thank you, guys. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. Mr. Chair, Delegate Johnson for the record, in strong support of HB 960, Ratepayer Freedom Act. This bill is essential for ratepayers simply because what's happening is that the burden for our Maryland ratepayers are being used by the utilities all across the country. Investor utility companies recover millions of dollars in lobbying and political expenditures. A study in 2022 from the Policy Institute showed that $1.1 billion in lobbying expenses from 2011 to 2020 were recovered back from the utilities. In Maryland, Utility companies such as Exelon, BG&E have spent millions of dollars in lobbying expenses, PR campaigns, and political donations. These costs, in many cases, are embedded in customer rates. In 2021, the PSC reviewed the documents and showed that customers often unwittingly and unknowingly fund these activities. Why is this important? This is important because it protects customers from hidden fees. It ensures that there's transparency and accountability. And finally, in conclusion, Mr. Chair, passing HB 960 is a step towards fairness, transparency, and customer protections. This bill does not prevent utility companies from engaging in lobbying activities or political activities, but what it does is it makes the utilities use their own money instead of ratepayer dollars to fund those things. So with that, I'll turn it over to my panel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Zoe Gallagher, and I'm the Policy Associate with Economic Action Maryland Fund. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on this bill. I am here today on behalf of Economic Action and a coalition of over 20 other organizations in strong support of House Bill 960, which builds on current law by expanding prohibitions on what utility providers can recover from ratepayers. Unlike most industries, where consumers have the freedom to spend their money in alignment with their values, like supporting local businesses over chains, utility customers do not have this choice. They can't just switch providers if they disagree with how their dollars are being spent. And that's precisely why this type of regulation is crucial. There's already precedent in Maryland law that sets a standard that captive ratepayers should not be on the line for covering lobbying expenses. Because of this precedent, opponents of the bill might claim that it is duplicative. However, that law is only a sentence long, allowing for vague interpretations. Current law also does not include other forms of unnecessary spending, like advertising on billboards or Little League jerseys. And while it may be true that spending data is available upon request, we believe this information should be proactively disclosed to ensure full transparency. We aren't pointing fingers or trying to catch these providers in a trap. We just believe this bill is common sense and should be codified into law, especially at a time when many are skeptical of where their ratepayer dollars are going. A point I would like to emphasize is that this bill does not prohibit this kind of spending. It just ensures this money is coming out of utility profits, not consumer pockets. You've heard all session about the rising cost of utilities and how many Marylanders are struggling to pay their bills. House Bill 960 may not provide immediate relief in the face of high rates, but it reinforces a principle that I think all of you would agree with. Struggling families that are trying to heat and cool their homes should not be paying for lavish parties hosted by trade associations or private jets for CEOs. Marylanders deserve to know their hard-earned dollars are being spent responsibly. The Ratepayer Freedom Act offers a straightforward solution, and for these reasons, we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Molly Woods. I'm here from the Office of People's Counsel in support of HB 960. So this bill does two things that would help our office and the PSC ensure that captive utility customers are not paying for corporate activities that advance the interests of shareholders. First, the bill would codify clear restrictions on the corporate expenses that utilities can charge their customers. Some of these expenses are addressed in existing law and regulations, but HB 960 would add clarity that is necessary to make that law actually enforceable. For example, as Zoe mentioned, the Public Utilities article prohibits utilities from charging ratepayers for, quote, lobbying expenses, but does not define that term. PSC regulations and the public ethics law are both more specific about what constitutes lobbying, but the two definitions are different, and that ambiguity leaves customers vulnerable to paying costs they shouldn't pay. Second, HB 960 would require utilities to include in an existing annual report to the PSC an itemized list of expenses. Currently, utilities provide some of this information at a high level in annual reports, in rate cases, and in biannual reports to the Ethics Commission. But the existing reporting is insufficient to allow for meaningful review. For example, the required annual reports contain only top-line expenses, which can bury expenses that customers shouldn't be paying for. This means that OPC, PSC staff, and other parties to complex rate case litigation must identify questionable costs, often small relative to the hundreds of millions of dollars in capital spending, and seek additional information through discovery. We and others have occasionally succeeded in getting inappropriate expenses excluded from rates this way, and there are some examples of that in my written testimony. But this ad hoc process is resource intensive and unlikely to catch all problematic expenses. An affirmative reporting requirement would appropriately shift the burden onto the utilities to make their spending and accounting more transparent. For these reasons, OPC urges a favorable committee report on this common sense bill.
Delegate Adams.
So Delegate, in your testimony, you said that the intention or the legislative intent of the bill is to not, cover lobbying costs because it's already prohibited. Is that, so tell me what your bill's doing then in that.
So essentially, what the bill does is it makes sure that the lobbying expenses or the expenditures are addressed and the PSC knows exactly what those lobbying expenses are.
Mm-hmm. So, I think your panelists maybe would answer the question, but it appears that if it's already prohibited, what's the purpose of the bill then? Or you're saying that there's not enough clarity on the subject, or, because I'm seeing some testimony that this is a well-understood and well-known concept. You can't include lobbying expenses in rate setting.
So you want to answer?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Thanks for the question, Delegate. So you're right. As I think both Zoe and I mentioned, lobbying expenses are expressly prohibited under the Public Utilities article. But as I said, there's no definition of lobbying expenses in the law there. And when we look to how that term has been interpreted, it varies. So there are examples of where the utilities and others have relied on the definition of lobbying that's in Maryland's public ethics law. That definition is quite limited. It applies to the activity and expenses associated with registered lobbyists. So that's, the 23 folks for BGE, 23 for PHI who are registered lobbyists, but it doesn't account for any of the other expenses or activity. There's a different definition in PSC regulations that references the FERC accounting code that captures more broadly expenses that are intended to influence public opinion or the decisions of public officials. So those are two very different definitions. There are examples of both sort of being used, and we believe that there's a real need for clarity around what the legislature intends when it says that utility companies can't charge their customers for lobbying expenses.
Last question. Are you concerned that the bill is overly expansive? In other words, we're capturing more than what really would be necessary as a business is trying to operate and do what businesses do, which is to advocate for their interests in any number of different ways? I mean, with the exception of lobbying in this particular setting.
So I've had a number of conversations with the utilities. I think one thing that they've brought up was that this bill captures some folks that should not be captured as far as giving their information as far as their salary that they're getting and everything. So I think that that's something that we may have some flexibility on, but that was one of the things that we were looking at.
All right.
Could I add one more thing, Mr. Chair? No? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate. So for you to present this bill and to the panel as well to advocate for this, there must have been some instances of violation of current laws, right? I would assume all utilities know they are not supposed to pass the lobbying costs or any political activities costs on to consumers. So how prevalent of a practice is that currently? And how do you discover? Because you mentioned in one of your remarks about some line item. Of course, I never paid it that close of attention, other than some, kind of ubiquitous surcharges here and there, right? So could you inform us how you come to realize this is a serious issue, so to speak, enough to use a law to address it,
Do you want to address?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Delegate. So I think to answer one part of that, this legislation has been passed in a few other states. I believe one of the virtual panelists will touch on it a little bit more. But they have found millions of dollars in ratepayer savings from unnecessary expenses. And so I think while it's sort of a you don't necessarily always know until you know situation, what we've seen in other states, we know that ratepayer dollars are being
So are you
recovered.
saying this bill is preemptive, or is it based on some issues that we have encountered in terms of Maryland utilities passing on costs to ratepayers?
Yeah, so in terms of the salary disclosure that Delegate Johnson mentioned, one of the reasons that's included is because representatives from a utility provider sent talking points to a Montgomery County Council meeting on the future of gas, right? And so their salaries aren't included in their lobbyist salaries, but they're obviously engaging in political activities that are maybe against the interests of ratepayers. So that's one example in Maryland. I know there's another example where BG&E tried to recover the rates from their customers for a skybox in Camden Yards. And so while the PSC is able to catch these occasionally, we don't always know because every time you ask for the line item, they have the OPC and the PSC has to litigate to get that information.
So Delegate, if I can just expound on that just a little bit. So you're talking about over the nation, certain issues like this that's gone on. So I can tell you that in Kentucky to Arizona, trade association dues have been recovered to the tune of $400,000 to $1.1 million. In California, the same thing, $1 million in trade association dues. That's like when they go to go and find new business business things that's going on within the industry. So $1 million there. In Minnesota, it was $300,000. So it has this sort of thing where utilities sort of bake those sort of funds or fees into ratepayer costs are all around this country.
Okay, I understand, so it's more preventive than
Yes,
anything.
yes, it
Okay,
is.
thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little confused myself, but so like the hearing we had yesterday, the briefing, is that lobbying?
I'm sorry, the meeting.
The briefing we had yesterday, is that lobbying under this bill?
No, I don't think that it would be lobbying.
So they were appearing before elected officials, that's not
Yeah.
lobbying?
I don't know. I wouldn't think that would be lobbying. I'm not sure.
So if they come in to our committee and speak on a bill, that's lobbying?
Yes.
Yes.
So what's the fine line? How does the bill define that? I'm just from an accounting standpoint, I'm trying to figure out how these guys are going to account for so you're expecting them to account for their time and stuff like that, and
Well, the main thing about it is the transparency portion of it. It's showing exactly what they're doing when they're coming in to lobby. So they have to give all this information to the PSC, and it's not clearly defined with the PSC what exactly lobbying is. So I think that's the rub here.
all right. And then the fiscal note says that it includes membership dues and stuff like that. So like if they're a member of the Edison Electric Institute, is that forbidden under this bill?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
When I worked for a public utility, they were members of the Edison Electric
Yes.
Institute. Is that forbidden under this bill?
Yes, that's not lobbying.
Who is that?
Ma'am, whoever is speaking, please, you have to wait till you're addressed. One, if there's a question addressed to you, you can then, but Whoever's
In all due
on-
respect, ma'am, the fiscal note says it includes membership and dues.
We're not going to argue with somebody that we can't see. So I'm sure we can hold that
I do
question
it all the
off.
time.
I think we know you do. But, so I want to make sure we get through this panel.
So
And so Doug and Wyble, if you could wrap up your questions and we could definitely get to that. Appreciate it.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, thanks, Delegate. I'd be happy to take a shot at that. So, although I was not the one who yelled.
Yeah,
at me there. So the way the bill is written, there are certain industry associations that may be more in the public interest where there would be an exception for that prohibition on cost recovery. So generally speaking, membership dues, those sorts of things would not be recoverable unless the company is able to show these certain things that are outlined in the bill. And I believe something like that, Edison Electric Institute might meet that definition.
So in a rate case, I assume the PSC looks at each one of those individually and makes a determination?
They do, although right now what tends to happen, and this is something that we've litigated in a couple of recent cases, is that the utility will come in and seek to recover all of the expenses, the membership and dues for trade industry associations, and minus the percentage that the association itself has said is for
Is
lobbying.
lobbying.
And that's usually like 4 or 5% of the dues. I think it's 4.3% for American Gas Association. And we've challenged that. Others have challenged that in rate cases. The PSC, in a recent Washington Gas case, agreed that that 4.3% was probably not high enough and that it was hard to know exactly how high it should be, but disallowed 25%. So this bill would help to say, for most of those industry association memberships, those costs are not presumptively recoverable, but there may be some exceptions to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this. This bill is basically saying that if one of these public utilities basically does any of these things as defined as a lobbying or political activity, which is influencing legislation, ordinances, references, appointments or removal of a public official, or the removal or modification or revocation of franchises, or any attempt to influence the general public with respect to an election, legislative matter, executive agency decision, ordinance, referendum, et cetera, that they just basically, well, first of all, they're prohibited from doing that, but they need to report it so that everyone can see. And so that if they are members of any organization, they pay dues, sponsorship, contributions, whatever, they need to have that listed so that everyone can see what it is based on all of these things that are listed in here. Am I correct? Am I oversimplifying? Because it sounds...
No, that's exactly what it is. Like I said from the very beginning, it's about transparency and accountability. So it's just simply making sure that what is being used is also being reported to the PSC so that everyone across the board will be able to know.
So then, in the case of a meeting such as we had yesterday, those entities were invited to answer questions and not meet this definition of lobbying activities. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think
they were invited to come and answer questions.
Sure, I think there might be a difference between coming at the invitation of a committee versus choosing to come in and advocate for a particular bill. I just want to clarify one quick thing, that the bill does not prohibit the utilities from doing any of these activities. So they are absolutely still allowed to pursue their own interests in lobbying, political activities, et cetera. It just says that they can't recover those costs from customers.
All right, see no further questions. We'll move on to, we do have Brittany Baker as well as 2 virtuals. So if we could pull the virtuals up, and then Brittany, of course, you can go first. I also believe we're done with this panel.
Hello, everyone. Chair Wilson, members of the committee, I'm Brittany Baker, the Maryland Director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I'm excited to be here supporting this bill because it's very important, especially now in the moment that we're in. Utility companies are monopolies, and you know you all are responsible for regulating them, and so. This bill is important to Chesapeake Climate Action Network for a couple of reasons. One, as we move forward in the clean energy transition, we need to do everything we can to reduce ratepayer burden. As discussed by the previous panel, almost $2 million last year were ratepayer funds were used to cover lobbying expenses across all of the Maryland utilities. But also, we have to be clear and accurate and forward-thinking with our policy decisions, and that's really what's at stake here regarding to this bill. This is not saying that utilities can't lobby. It's if you're lobbying against ratepayers, the ratepayers should not be paying for that. And so one provision of the bill that I really like is it says that the utility companies can go to the Public Service Commission and recover reasonable costs for the activities specified in the bill that are directly beneficial to the ratepayer and in the public interest. And so we're not really tying their hands by passing this bill. We're just saying when you lobby, if it's not for the public interest, you can't recover that in rates. I respectfully request a favorable report.
What exactly do you mean lobbying against the ratepayer?
If you're lobbying for something that increases bills, I would say that's lobbying against a ratepayer.
Even if it's like talking about infrastructure?
No. If it's beneficial infrastructure, then it's not.
Just an interesting choice of words that you use there. Thank you.
We have two more people. Lauren Peltier. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hello, Chair Wilson and members of ECM. It's Laurel Peltier, and I very much thank you for letting me do this virtual since the meeting changed. And I have a story. I'm here on behalf of AARP Maryland. And Tammy and I were actually in a story about exactly what we're talking about in New Orleans. So I wanted to explain how AARP feels that it's absolutely a utility's right to spend money on, you know, American Gas Association memberships, EEI memberships. That's part of their business. But the real question this bill gets to is, should the ratepayers pay for that? So we go down to NARUC. That is where all the PSC commissioners in the entire country get together. This is 2023. There's a big grist article on this exact thing. Unbeknownst to us, we were part of this party that was in this article. So Tammy and I have, we're all at the Marriott. We're with every single PSC commissioner, and our Maryland commissioners were not part of this party. But we decided to save up our money and go out for a great dinner at Justine's, just around the corner in the French Quarter. And we're sitting there at the bar, and this mixologist is making these unbelievable drinks. Now, there's a private party going on in the back, and we kind of wondered, like, I wonder if that's NARUC people, but we can't see it. I mean, these drinks were like, you know, fires coming out of them and the egg foam, and we're talking to the bartender, and we're like, who's getting all these like $40 drinks? And he goes, oh, there's a big party back there with NARUC, and it's from the American Gas Association. And we kind of looked at each other and we said, pretty sure we're paying for those drinks in some way since we're ratepayers. So that kind of event is something that they would do as a business. And this bill would say those American Gas Association fees that our regulated utilities pay should be their expense and shouldn't go into the rate case. So I wanted to share that story because I think that's what this bill would fix. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, we move on to Mr. Matthew Casper.
Good afternoon, Chair Wilson and members of the committee. My name is Matt Casper. I'm the Deputy Director of the Energy and Policy Institute. EPI is a national utility research and watchdog organization. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony with you all today. And again, I apologize, I can't be there in person as well. EPI joins the larger coalition in supporting this bill, and our coalition greatly appreciates the conversations we have had with members over the past year on this issue. When this bill was introduced last year, our coalition pointed to the states that had recently passed this type of bill, Colorado, Connecticut, and Maine, and how we soon expected savings to happen as a result of those laws in those states. And 2 years later, as a result of those bills, we can specifically point to several utility rate cases that have been processed and actual savings. So in Connecticut, regulators cited this type of law in their books when they denied over $600,000 in costs that Avangrid wanted to include in rates. And in Colorado, the regulators there disallowed more than $775,000 in annual costs that Xcel Energy tried to recover from customers, and hopefully more refunds on the way, since the regulators ordered the utility company there to have more disclosure of who was doing political activities. And I think the American Gas Association captured it well when they submitted comments to FERC on a related issue, when they said, quote, "While lobbying is a form of advocacy, not all advocacy is lobbying." So this bill, it doesn't just prevent the customers from paying for the lobbying and these other political activities, it's also the image-enhancing advertisements, the unnecessary costs like entertainment and gifts, all of which aren't needed to keep the lights on or the gas flowing. HB 960 will help save customers money, and I urge a favorable report.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome my vice chair. Well, he's leaving. I think that concludes the favorables. We're going to move on to the unfavorables now. Brittany Jones, Ann Clace, and Carol Collins.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Ann Clace here on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power, respectfully in opposition to House Bill 960. As mentioned, this legislation seeks to prohibit utilities from recovering through rates various costs, such as lobbying costs, membership dues, or sponsorships. This bill is duplicative as there are already provisions in existing laws, regulations, and orders that limit these costs. The very nature of being in a highly regulated industry means utility expenditures and whether they are recoverable is highly scrutinized. Additionally, the new definition of lobbying in this bill includes anyone who performs policy research, analysis, preparation, and planning. This new definition could potentially require individuals in our regulatory, operations, customer, and legal teams all to be considered as registered lobbyists. Finally, House Bill 960 singles out Maryland utilities and places additional burdens that are not applicable to any other industry lobbyist in Maryland. For the reasons discussed, PEPCO and Delmarva Power respectfully request an unfavorable report on House Bill 960.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Brittany Jones here in opposition on behalf of BGE on House Bill 960. BGE is in complete agreement with my colleague Ann Clace representing PEPCO. I do want to emphasize the fact that BGE does not recoup any cost for lobbying as defined by Maryland ethics law in section 5-702 of the general provisions article. None of that is recovered from our customers. Lobbying is considered a below-the-line expense paid for by our shareholders. The same is true for non-informational advertising and marketing pursuant to existing PSC regulations. House Bill 960 improperly redefines what constitutes lobbying to apply to only investor-owned gas and electric companies and is not inclusive to all industries. This bill also inappropriately scrutinizes the expensing of industry trade associations. These associations are considered a best practice for gas and electric service companies to join and participate, as it serves as a highly effective platform for sharing industry trends, benchmarking, best practices, and collaboration on issues like clean energy and grid reliability. BGE achieved its best reliability performance in the customer's history just in 2024. Upgrades in distribution automation, reclosers, and other smart grid technologies contributed to more than 2 million avoided customer outages. These technologies are thoroughly discussed, examined, and benchmarked by EEI, the Edison Electric Institute that was just discussed, and we're an active member and participant. Most importantly, I just want to be really clear, any costs specifically related to policy advocacy provided by industry associations are expensed by shareholders and are not paid for by ratepayers. And this method of calculation is done by the IRS. So the IRS actually looks and separates the cost related to advocacy lobbying, and that's the portion we charge to our shareholders. With all that said, respectfully, we request an unfavorable report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam, members of the committee. I'm Carville Collins on behalf of Columbia Gas of Maryland. The points have been made by my fellow panelists, but just a further observation about the trade association dues. Those dues can and do benefit customers and companies, and therefore we respectfully submit they should continue to be recoverable in part. Most trade or business association activities are not lobbying, and these groups provide a variety of diverse services to members, that is, our companies that benefit both the member and the companies. These associations disclose the precise percentage of their membership dues that are attributed to lobbying, so that members, the utility companies, are prevented from taking any tax benefit or rate recovery for such expenses. However, in the bill, there is a 1% limit. There's a threshold of 1%. That effectively is a ban on recovering of any of the trade group membership dues that public service companies might pay. In addition, Mr. Chairman and members, according to the fiscal note and what you've heard today, clearly a public service company cannot charge off lobbying expenses against its ratepayers. That's been the law of Maryland for 27 years. That's at section 4-103 of the Public Utilities article. This bill adds the same prohibition to a different section of the article, section 4-504. The bill also adds a second definition of lobbying to the code. The original definition is at 7-502 of the General Provisions article. The new one for public service companies only is at section 4-504 of the Public Utilities article. We oppose being singled out among all businesses in the state, especially since we are in full compliance with all ethics laws and public utility laws. And just as a last point, we note that the bill drafting, and we note some concerns with bill drafting and code enforcement and interpretation when our laws begin to state certain provisions twice in different sections of the code. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are there any other businesses in the state that are private investor-owned businesses that have monopoly franchises, captured customers who have to pay rates to access life-saving, life-sustaining services?
I can't think of any, but I know before, we've said before this committee, as OBC, the benefit of utilities being a monopoly just because of the infrastructure, and then
I agree. Yeah, so I agree. You need to be a monopoly, and it's a franchise that's been given to you to engage in the public interest, and it is our job and the Public Service Commission's job to implement the laws that we write. And so I think when you're saying, why are you picking on us and singling us out, the lobbying rules that apply to everyone else, all the other companies sort of sitting behind you, why would they be different for you? That would be why they would be different for you. So I guess my second question is, and this is sort of related, the BG&E testimony says that you oppose HB 960 because it is overreaching and undermines the expressive authority of the PSC. Do you know who gives that authority to the PSC?
Yes.
Who is it?
Yeah, the state of Maryland, the General Assembly.
In the laws that we write. So we're the ones who decide what authority they have and what it is that they are gonna implement. And so when we decide that the authority we've given them hasn't sufficiently protected ratepayers, it's not overreach for us to say we're changing the definitions, we're rewriting them, we're clarifying.
Sure, and could I respond to that, Delegate
Sure,
Charkoudian? 'Cause
yeah,
I completely
absolutely.
appreciate your perspective on that. The way that we would read the bill is to insinuate that perhaps the commission hasn't done just and prudent approval of our rate case proceedings, because we do charge every bit of lobbying to shareholders. So that's why I think we're a little confused, since we have existing law on the subject
well,
to make that definition.
Maybe I can help clarify. I think that one of the questions is, if you're doing it already, why, when we articulate it more clearly than the one sentence that's in current law, why is there such a fight against it? I think that's what's not clear to us, because you're saying you have it in law, we're doing it already, so whatever you do, don't put any more specifics on that law and don't make us disclose anymore. So it makes us feel like, are you doing it already?
Sure. Understand again, and what I would say in response to that is that what this bill does is it does extend the definition of lobbying.
That's what
for
we intend to do.
Planning, analyzing.
That's right.
So we're talking legal services, our customer operations team perhaps. This is really changing the whole mechanism and foundation of how we do our business.
And so I think that, so then it's not right to say we're doing it already. What you're saying is we're doing it the way we've interpreted it, and you're changing the interpretation, right?
Do you want to?
Is that right?
Well, I would just say there's probably two parts to that. One, I would say, is the intention that, you know, hundreds of our employees are potentially now registered as lobbyists in Maryland, our legal team,
No, 'cause
our
it
regular
doesn't
team.
change.
Because it does, because the definition includes planning, analysis, all stuff that our teams are currently doing that are not registered lobbyists. They're not in Maryland. I would argue the people that testified yesterday as SMEs, they need to register as lobbyists because they do all of that. And so.
But this bill doesn't change who needs to register as a lobbyist.
It does if you're participating in those activities.
It doesn't say they need to register as lobbyists.
They're considering the
Hang on.
lobbying.
No, it doesn't say they need to register as lobbyists, just like the American Gas Association doesn't have to come to Maryland and register as a lobbyist. They just have to itemize what their time was spent on. So we're not changing who has to register as a lobbyist. We're changing itemization. I have one last question.
But to be clear, so all of those people need to now document when they're doing planning, procedures, analysis, everything that they do when they're participating in a work group, all of that needs to be documented? Is that the intention?
I think that what the bill does is it changes the way that we think about all of the work that goes into a lobbying campaign. And so all of the people who are creating graphics that are going to be used to promote Stride, and all the people who are creating the work that turns into the glossy report that gets distributed to us to change how we vote on things, yeah, I think that's the idea, is that you're capturing the fact that there's a significant amount of work that goes into influencing legislation, and any of that work shouldn't be paid for by ratepayers.
Yeah, I say we spent a lot of time making those beautiful infographics and doing a lot of that work already. That is kind of what we do too, so.
Yeah.
That's great, so I guess.
Right. So I think the last thing that I just want to say is,
I just want to make sure we remind my colleagues, we have a voting session,
Yes.
subcommittees, and we have a second floor session today.
We've got like 3
Go-
hours.
just on the trade organizations, like, do you think that right now the 4.3% is avoiding ratepayers paying for the American Gas Association's parties?
I can address
Yeah.
that. Delegate, entertainment at a convention, at a meeting with regulators or public officials, that's all going to fall in the lobbying category. So that is what is claimed by AGA and other organizations as part of the 4.3 or whatever percentage it is. Those expenses would not be, contrary to what you heard earlier, they would not be, there's no way under current Public Service Commission practices, any of those expenses could be recoverable from ratepayers.
Except the AGA isn't going in front of Public Service Commission. They're putting out a number, and then the Public Service Commission has to just accept that. So I think what this does is it gives us a chance to have a little bit more scrutiny into how the AGA is spending our ratepayers' dollars, and that's what we're trying to do here. Thank you.
Delegate Boafo.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be brief here because I know yesterday was a lot for all of you guys. But I just want to ask a couple of questions. First, Brittany, you talked about recouping costs. Just for the record, we're saying no dollar of ratepayer money is being used for lobbying.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Okay, so let's move to the membership piece. And gentleman, I don't know the gentleman's name at the end there, but you mentioned that the trade association piece, though, is paid, could potentially be paid by ratepayers. Is that true?
What the commission does, Delegate, in reviewing any claim that the company might make for cost recovery is look at the activities of that association and also understand what the percentage of activities that that organization claims as lobbying. In the end, and I've been practicing before the Public Service Commission for more than 30 years in these rate proceedings, in the end, what the commission does is they look at all facts and circumstances involving those membership dues and dollars, and they make a determination. It may be precisely at the 4.9% threshold. It might be higher. Whatever the decision is that the commission makes, they go through a process in the rate case proceeding to determine what is an appropriate amount of monies to recover from customers versus what costs should be allocated to shareholders.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to take that offline, because I do think there could be, look, I'm a part of a lot of trade associations in the work I do when I'm outside of the General Assembly. A lot of those are not just professional development and lobbying. I mean, a lot of those can be intertwined, so I do think there should be some conversation about getting that money out of the ratepayers' pockets. I'm just curious about the current process and how lobbying works for you guys in the state of Maryland. You register, and me on the federal level, every quarter I have to do an LD-203, LD-204. Do you guys have a similar process happening here in Maryland?
Yeah, it's very procedural, very scrutinized. We've never had one inquiry from the Maryland Ethics Commission, let alone a complaint. So we are filing activity lobbying reports.
How often is how in-depth is it?
Biannual, twice a year.
Okay.
So according to the schedule, we're listing the industry, the subject matters that we're lobbying on. We have a calculation of how many of our hours are then going to be billed. All of that's publicly accessible.
And while I'm obviously a fan of Delegate Johnson and this bill, I do actually agree with you potentially on the definition, because I assume you guys do have public policy officials who may not even be in Maryland, who are doing, similar to my company, research work, never meet with elected officials like I do, but are out there doing whatever. And you're saying that those folks could potentially be captured in all of this.
According to the new definition, yes, it would be very expansive, where we would have more, in our opinion, what we would have to register as lobbyists according to the Maryland Ethics.
But to Delegate Charkoudian's point, they don't have to register, per se.
I guess we'd wonder how.
If we made that clear, like they don't have to register, but maybe we do want to know how many hours they're putting into the public policy process. I know that's burdensome on your side, but would that make that a little bit clearer?
Yeah, I think, is it just reporting, or is it saying that time spent doing analysis, looking at industry trends, doing research on things like geothermal, is that then a shareholder expense and not the cost of doing business to continue to innovate and give our customers
And I really want to caution my colleagues that we have a lot to do, so we can do some of this offline.
I'll take this offline.
Thank you.
Sure, happy to.
I'm not trying to shut you down, Delegate Howard. Just.
Honestly, Delegate Flacco got a little bit to what I was.
Okay, thank you. Somebody's still trying. All right, Delegate Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question. So, it may not be that quick, but, first of all, thank you all so very much for meeting with me and, trying to get me to understand a lot of what you do. But I'm just going to go back to the trade association dues. So when the question was posed to you, sir, you said a lot of words, but you didn't necessarily say yes or no. So are those fees, pushed off on the ratepayers?
I'll give you a very definitive answer. No, if they are attributable in any way to lobbying activity, they are not embedded in rates.
So still, that was sort of like a yes and a no.
It's an absolute no.
It's an absolute no, because I have some information here that says that Maryland utilities are annually billing ratepayers to the tune of millions. So,
Would it be possible to share that information too? Well, for dues and memberships, that part is rate-based. That part gets included in rates.
so you are charging
For
ratepayers.
BGE, I can speak, so for the membership
But
to
I
be a
thought you said
part.
it was no, though. Oh, I'm sorry. All right,
Thanks,
all right.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, so, and it could get confusing, but when the IRS itemizes what part of EEI, as an example, is considered advocacy lobbying. So that's a certain amount, we get that amount, we charge to our shareholders. That is not lobbying on behalf of those associations, not charged to ratepayers. What is charged is us to be a member of the organization for the more technical benefits, as we're looking into grid modernization, different innovations, technologies. This is where you have best practices and benchmarking shared across the country, which is where we get a lot of our technical insight to be able to implement the things that a lot of the times the General Assembly is looking for us to do.
And so, thank you so much for clarifying that for me. And then I would just say to that point, wouldn't this bill clarify, because if we're unclear and the general public is definitely unclear, wouldn't this bill clarify that?
So I think that we have a disagreement on what should and shouldn't be covered by rates. So we completely agree with you where we do align. Nothing with lobbying is recovered
favorable
by
with
ratepayers.
amendments?
The way the bill is written says that nothing, not even the membership, can be expensed by ratepayers. So we do believe there's a major customer benefit for us participating in these trade organizations for more of that best practice benchmarking data. That part has direct benefit to customers. As I shared BGE, we avoided more than 2 million customer outages directly because of the insight and intel and information sharing we got from being a part of that trade association. So that part does benefit customers for us to be involved. The part that would not be expensed by them is any lobbying for policy. We agree there. And Delegate Johnson, I also add the other important thing is
Yeah, I'm rapping. I'm rapping. So I just wanted to say that thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
And I'm glad to see that Charles has made it back, because
Thank
threw
you so
some
much.
arrows at him yesterday. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys very much. That concludes this hearing. We're going to skip because we have a chairman here who's just dying to get back down to his committee. And I'm sure he's got some wonderful things to tell us. House Bill 827. Chairman Clippinger, do you have a panel, sir?
Yes.
Go ahead and call him up.
Come on up. Whoever's coming. Good afternoon, committee, most esteemed committee, my friends, former colleagues here on the Economic Matters Committee, most adequate Chair Wilson, most adequate Chair Wilson, and Delegate Fisher. It's my pleasure to bring before you House Bill 827, a bill related to the CPCN process and community solar projects that would be between 2 and 5 megawatts. The idea here, as you know, we made community solar permanent in Maryland 2 years ago. This builds off the success that community solar is having and seeks to provide a set system, a set process for approving applications for connections through the, to the CPCN process for those smaller community solar facilities. There are 60 applications that are being anticipated in the next few months for community solar facilities. So far, the PPRP has reviewed only 7 of them. And according to the Coalition for Community Solar Access, they've polled their members and they believe there are another 130 community solar projects under development that will require a CPCN application. So under current law, these projects, the 2 to 5 megawatt projects, go through the CPCN project, the process that's really designed for larger scale power plants. But what we're looking for here is a process that is more betterly, is better tailored, sorry, to the more betterly tailored to these smaller projects. So it would require the PPRP to develop a standard siting and design requirements for community solar projects and submit it to the PSC. And they have to, those requirements must be in line with the state's renewable energy commitments, including environmental preservation, setbacks, landscape screening, and strict adherence to stormwater management, erosion control, and site stabilization. Additionally, the projects are required to ensure public safety and abide by industry best standards and comply with specific licensing conditions previously established by the Commission for Solar Energy Generating Systems. During this session, the advocates for the legislation, along with representatives from MACO and other organizations, have been meeting regularly, and you should have, or the committee should have, a set of amendments, significant amendments, where, at least as I understand it, people have come to an agreement as to a CPCN process for these smaller facilities. And so I would encourage you to look at those as well. My panel will go into a little bit more detail, but if you have any questions, I certainly look forward to hearing those questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair and Vice Chair, members of the committee, Rob Garagiola on behalf of CCSA. I want to thank Chair Clippinger for sponsoring House Bill 827 and Delegates Charkoudian and Fraser Hidalgo for co-sponsoring it. As was mentioned, in 2023, you made the community solar program permanent, and the PSC is now implementing that. It is a huge success. I mean, recall, I know we had discussion yesterday, Tripoli, in your committee about cost for electricity. If you recall, community solar does guarantee for those subscribers lower cost electricity than standard SOS. So those that are participating in it will actually save money. There's also a 40% low and moderate income requirement as well. So much success. There's a lot of interest in Maryland, but we have a problem before us. And as Chair Clippinger mentioned, the PPRP has, I believe, 33 CPCN applications before it today, and I believe another 27 pre-applications. That's 60 applications. And in a typical year, they have 7 applications. So that's like a nearly 10-fold increase, which is a good thing, but there's gonna be a backlog. And as was mentioned, CCSA did a poll of their members, and they're expecting about another 130 applications. Again, a good thing. This bill, what it seeks to do is essentially pull together stakeholders, and as Chair Clippinger mentioned, we've had extensive conversations with PPRP, with MACO, with PSC, with environmental groups. There's consensus on this bill and on this approach to create potentially more stringent standards for community solar under a separate kind of district court process for a CPCN for these smaller projects. And in exchange for that, it would be a faster process. And it wouldn't be the current CPCN process, which is more evidentiary in process, like a circuit court process, I would argue. So there's consensus for this. We believe it's ready for prime time. As was mentioned, there are some amendments that brought in the support of some other advocates. And with that, Mr. Chair, would urge support for House Bill 827.
Thank you, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the House Economic Matters Committee. My name is Charlie Coggeshall, and I'm the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director at the Coalition for Community Solar Access. We've been an active stakeholder throughout the state's history with community solar, and we are grateful for this committee's support in passing HB 908 in 2023, which made community solar a permanent clean energy and equity solution in Maryland. I'm pleased to report that the permanent program officially launched just a couple weeks ago on March 3rd. And although the regulatory design is largely settled, siting remains the greatest barrier to actual project deployment. HB 827 is a strong complement to the leadership's bill, HB 1036, and solves a related siting issue regarding the treatment of community solar projects in the CPCN process. Led by Chair Clippinger and Delegates Charkoudian and Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, HB 827 would establish a distributed generation CPCN, or DGCPCN. It addresses the outsized burden on industry and state agencies as a result of both a mismatch of process relative to the need and impact and to a growing wave of community solar projects seeking a CPCN. As mentioned, a polling of my members indicates there are at least 130 community solar projects currently under development that will require a CPCN application in the future. This is compared to an average of roughly 5 to 7 per year that the PPRP had processed over the past decade. For industry, the DGCPCN would provide a more right-sized permitting process that requires less time and less cost relative to the standard CPCN. And for state agencies, it would reduce project variability and provide the PPRP and PSC with more objective and efficient measures for considering projects. Most importantly, HB 827 will increase the scale and pace of deployment of much-needed clean energy in the state, coupled with also much-needed guaranteed electricity cost savings for participating low and moderate income customers. CCSA urges a favorable report on HB 827.
Hey, Mr. Chairman. So it says project size 2 megawatts to 5 megawatts. Can you translate like how many acres that might be? Sure. If it's ground mount?
Yep. So usually it can vary, but the average is probably 5 to 8 acres per megawatt.
Okay. And does the bill still require public hearing or no? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Again, it seeks a more stringent process in some ways in order to make it clear, and then it's more stringent but faster, allowing these smaller projects to move along.
As you see, you don't have a timer, Mr. Chair, so you take all the time you need. We do have Delegate Frazier Dago.
Very quickly, as this is designed to move along certain project a little bit more quickly, is there a difference, like an application or a price difference at the PSC between a CPCN and DG CPCN?
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Actually, what is built into the bill is the ability for the PPRP and the PSC to recover their costs associated with both the implementation of the program and the ongoing management of applications and processing of applications. So that's a to be determined amount that will be based specifically on cost recovery so that there is no impact on the cost for the state. It should be self-sustainable.
If I may just add, so the fiscal note recognizes the language in the bill which says the PSC can recapture costs for its costs. The fiscal note doesn't have, and it shows a cost in the fiscal note for DNR's work in this process. The amendments actually address that. So with the amendments, there would be zero cost in the fiscal note.
So it'd be all recoverable?
It would be, the cost would be recoverable for both DNR, PPRP's work and the PSC. The original language of the bill was just the PSC. With the amendments, it also covers the cost for DNR, so the fiscal note should be offset fully.
Everything's covered. Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm a little confused because.
Delegate Howard, I want you to make sure you're kind to your new committee chair, so.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm a little confused because I heard Rob say this is less evidentiary, and then I heard the gentleman in the center say the PSC will be able to act more objectively. And just for the record, 2.5 megawatts is 10 to 15 acres, depending on factors like panel efficiency, terrain, et cetera. So we're looking at 20 to 30 acres per site, correct? Yeah. So, okay, so good. So which is it? It's less evidentiary. Right. And this is clear, this is moving right along with, what was it, 1036, 1066?
Yeah, so very different.
So this is to speed up.
So that, the chair's bill, which you heard a couple of Fridays ago, seeks to put standards, that chair.
And this
standards
seeks to speed them up. But
No, what this does actually is a little different. So the approach in this that was agreed to by, MACO was part of that process, PPRP, PSC, advocates, environmentalists, et cetera, is it actually puts forward a stakeholder process that the PPRP would convene. So they would be an arbiter, and they would actually look, and I think they're looking at a balanced approach that brings in local government interests, other interests,
for the folks at home,
all stakeholders, exactly. And the idea is
for the folks at home. Yeah, the PPRP.
Okay, the Power Plant Research Program. So that's the organization within the Department of Natural Resources that has the first whack, so to speak, at a CPC and the Certificate of Public Need.
And their task with trying to meet clean energy goals set forth by the state.
Right.
Correct.
So
Okay.
in the process, basically, for the bill, they would establish with stakeholder input over the next year what these more rigorous standards would be for projects that are in the 2 to 5 megawatt range for just community solar.
All based on the clean energy standards set forth by.
Yeah, but it would be, it'd be like setback and other types of standards, and input would be gathered from stakeholders, which is a good process to have. And the expectation is that those standards are going to be more rigorous.
They're very rigorous.
Than will be in potentially the chair's bill or that exists currently today. And in exchange for that, if a developer, a community solar developer, wants to go through a faster process, then they would need to meet, they would know in advance, these are the standards we have to meet. So it's like the trade-off is, do we want to go through this faster community solar process that the PPRP is going to establish?
Which is controlled by the PPRC, which is.
Indeed, the
their
power
mission
plant.
is set forth by the clean energy rules set by the state.
And the PSC. So go through a faster process that's more stringent, if we can meet these standards that are developed, to be developed, or do we continue to go down the path?
More stringent how?
I think the expectation.
Probably a lot more like community input.
I would say probably more community input, but the idea is those standards are going to be set in advance. So over the next year, that input is going to be gathered to develop those standards.
Are going to be set in advance before the community. Okay.
So between July 1 of this year.
That sounds a little weighted.
And July 1 of the following year, so July 1, 2025 to July 1, 2026, the power plant research program at DNR, which is involved in the current today CPCN process, they would convene with stakeholders to devise these standards. Then the subsequent year, the PSC would put together the regulatory process and framework for developers to meet those standards. So then 2 years from now, a community solar developer is going to have a choice. There will be standards that we anticipate are going to be more rigorous. I think all the parties that are involved in this legislation would anticipate are going to be more rigorous.
Been here 11 years. I've definitely heard we potentially think there might.
Well, I mean, MACO has been sitting in these conversations.
Well, I mean, that doesn't, okay.
I'm just.
That's one organization.
True.
The Maryland Association of
Farm Bureau can participate in this as well.
Have they been asked?
They will be a part of the process. The objective is that the PPRP is a balanced venue to get that type of input. It is probably one of the most balanced venues you could find to do that. So we thought that was a good place to convene this, to devise those standards. It's the developer's expectation that the trade-off is a faster process for a higher set level of standards. And if they can't meet those rigorous standards, then they'll go through the regular DG CPCN process. CPCN process.
Okay, just seems like a little bit of definitely not playing with house money. So, okay, as far as the localities are concerned. So, thank you.
Thank you, and obviously, Mr. Garagiola, you can tell you used to be a senator because that was an extraordinarily long-winded way of covering that. But I think we got there in the end. You still with us, Mr. Chair?
He also circuit court, district court. He's trying to do a little judiciary thing.
Right. He was trying to please everybody. Great job. Seeing no more questions, that does conclude this hearing. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Somebody we don't hear from too often, Delegate Adams.
Yes, could I have my panel come forward? So, Mr. Chairman, during this session, I actually passed out of this committee a cannabis bill as a primary sponsor, and so you get 2 for 1 this session. I'm bringing a clean energy bill before you and the committee. Okay, so for the record, Delegate Chris Adams here to present House Bill 1417, titled Department of General Services Clean Energy Procurement Program Establishment. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, as we navigate our current energy crisis in Maryland and prepare for an impending increase in energy use, it is critical that we maximize our ability to generate clean, homegrown energy in our state. The legislation before you today is a logical next step in developing this homegrown energy source. You'll ask what the bill does. It will establish a clean energy procurement program within DGS. This pilot program has 2 objectives. First, it enables DGS to collaborate with other agencies and partners to develop a process for procuring a percentage of renewable natural gas whether it's renewable natural gas or biogas, as part of their fossil-derived natural gas purchases. Second, it facilitates an environmental impact study conducted by the University of Maryland to assess the advantages of biogas over non-renewable natural gas. Mr. Chairman, I'd ask you to move favorable, and I'll pass the committee testimony to my panel. Thank you for the opportunity to present the bill today.
Chairman Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, esteemed committee members, for the record, Andrew Castley testifying on behalf of Biona and Jevco in support of House Bill 1417. As Delegate Adams says, this is a beautifully simple bill. It just does two things. First of all, annually, when DGS goes to purchase natural gas for their facilities, they work with the university system to purchase natural gas for, like, the building you're sitting in right now and every building that's on this campus and across the state. Whenever they make that procurement, they would have to stop and they would have to check the availability of renewable natural gas to supplement that purchase. If for some reason the availability and the price is not adequate, they don't move forward. The bill clearly states that. The second piece is it requires the University of Maryland system to do a study, an environmental study, to determine the benefits of using renewable natural gas over natural gas that is extracted from the Earth's surface. This bill supports Governor Moore's climate pollution reduction plan by moving forward on the recommendations from the Maryland Department of Energy, the Maryland Department of the Environment, to reduce our methane generating waste from landfills by using AD. I would like to point out some errors, I think, with the fiscal note. RNG and natural gas are the exact same product. They're produced the same way. Organic material decomposes and it generates methane. Whether that's occurring below the Earth's surface over hundreds of thousands of years or whether it's occurring in a vessel in 2 months, exact same product. So DGS says in their statement that they would need to hire an RNG expert so that annually they could make this determination, asking for an entirely new PIN for that. I would like to guess that they have the experts on staff and they don't need to hire an RNG expert. In their recent, and I would urge that we move forward with an all of the above approach to addressing our energy needs with the state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Stephanie Lansing. I'm a professor at the University of Maryland, and I am an anaerobic digestion expert. We actually did an assessment statewide for Maryland Department of Agriculture, assessing the ability for anaerobic digestion to occur on farms throughout the state using different types of manure sources. We've also been involved with food waste anaerobic digestion to try to take food that is going to the landfill and creating greenhouse gases, capturing that instead through digestion and creating renewable energy. We have done life cycle assessments of the digestion process as part of our work at the University of Maryland. And again, we would have the expertise to do what is assigned in this bill in terms of understanding the life cycle benefits of taking waste and other resources and creating, as you said, biogas that can be used both for electricity, it can be used directly for heating, or it can be used as renewable natural gas, which is 100% methane. So it's something when you turn on your stove, when you use your heating, that is natural gas that can be created through a matter of days or weeks through this anaerobic digestion process versus millions of years for fossil fuels. And when that biogas is used, it is not considered additional CO2. It is actually biogenic CO2 that's part of the process. So the idea is to create the infrastructure and to create the need for this, because we know we can do it. We have it in California. They actually have a $42 million grant fund just for digesters. And so we're actually a little bit behind where other states are doing in terms of anaerobic digestion, but this is the next step to get us to where we need to be to transition to renewable fuels. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, Carville Collins on behalf of Columbia Gas of Maryland. We're in support of the legislation. You have our written testimony, and there is written testimony in support from other gas utilities in the state. At its core, this bill is simply a good idea because it goes to all four, I think, of the considerations that this committee is looking at very carefully this session. Resource adequacy. Second, adequacy of energy resources when it's needed, both in the near term and in the long term. Third, continued pursuit of climate solutions. And fourth, energy affordability. This bill is a good idea because it advances all four of these concepts, and it does so in a measured pilot program approach. Biogas is a proven and fast-developing energy resource, and it is available now because there's an existing distribution and delivery system in place. Biogas is ready to use in existing natural gas infrastructure, and it can be injected into existing pipelines to immediately begin reducing natural gas carbon content. Not 6 or 8 or 10 years from now, but now. Further, biogas can be used in existing natural gas equipment. It allows decarbonization without the need to replace or retrofit systems. Studies have shown that biogas can be a lower cost way to decarbonize heating systems, and the further studies that are provided for under this bill can help us improve upon that prospect. We urge your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. First of all, Doctor, you kind of mentioned the CO2 over. Could you briefly describe the difference between just leaving the manure or the composting food scraps, just leaving it and not doing anything with it, versus turning it into biogas so that it can be used? Like, when it comes to emissions, can you just do that life cycle for us quickly, please?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the cow eats the corn, right? And the corn took in carbon through photosynthesis, right? So that carbon came in, we eat it, they eat it. When I flush my toilet in University of Maryland, it goes to the DC wastewater treatment plant, the carbon is in that waste. If we do not digest it and that waste is in an anaerobic environment at a landfill or in a manure lagoon, methane is produced. Methane is 25 times more powerful than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. It's great for climate change, right? So its CO2 equivalent is 25x. Okay. And so if we capture, so just putting the cover over the lagoon and taking it, even if I just flare it, even if I just burn it and don't use it, I've reduced 25 times the CO2 equivalents that would go into the atmosphere. As soon as I flare it even, then that goes back to CO2, which is the same CO2 that came in through the corn that was eaten by the cow or eaten by myself. And so it's not an additional CO2 that goes into the atmosphere because it was methane, right? Versus if you capture it and use that, not flaring it, but now let's put it into electricity in a gen set, which we have. Let's put it into heat. Let's clean it up to 100% natural gas and put it into a vehicle fleet. Now again, I'm offsetting the fossil fuels that would come in. So we get our most actually reductions just by not having the methane go up, and then we get an additional reduction by replacing the fossil fuel for electricity, for heating, for cooking, whatever you might be doing. So it's actually a double in the sense that you reduce natural emissions, and that food waste and manure are putting that methane up right now. So we reduce that, plus we provide a renewable fuel source.
So you're not burning, you're just burning once, as opposed to, okay. So my next question is, Mr. Castley, how many locations are there that are producing biogas now in the state? I know you represent one, but can you tell me how many there are, and how much can be made?
So thanks for the question,
potentially.
Elliot. Well, right now, our company that has come over from Europe, the parent company has 250 facilities across other countries. But in the United States, on the East Coast, as far as a large-scale digester that just processes food waste, Maryland is really an entity to itself. So we have one in Jessup, Maryland. There are smaller digesters that are like on-farm digesters throughout the state. So there's multiple smaller digesters, but we're really looking to get the industry up and running. We're producing just a fraction. Compared to like in Europe, 40% of the gas that's in their gas line is renewable natural gas. And they have projected target dates of 100% renewable natural gas in their gas lines by 2050. So it's really a brand-new fledgling industry that's looking to take root. Now, I will say that's just food waste. On the eastern shore in Delaware, we're building a facility that will run entirely, or not entirely, but 90% off of DAFT waste, and that's animal processing residuals. The General Assembly passed legislation last year to minimize the application of DAFT waste onto as surface land application. The nice thing is in environmental remediation, we're now going to take that material, we're going to run it through a digester, and we will generate energy with that before it goes to an organic fertilizer.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
A little curious about how it's collected. So Mr. Chair, sorry. How is it collected and introduced into the system? Is it mixed with the natural gas?
So it is, if it's sent to, as Dr. Lanson said, there's a very flexible fuel source. You can use it directly in vehicles. You can use it for heat on site. You can, like we have combined heat and power
But the
system.
example of burning
But
it in the
if you
building,
were injecting into the line, it's just like our facility ingest, we have a pipe and we just inject it because it's virtually indistinguishable from natural gas that it's the same product.
And what's the price? Is it similar to natural gas?
No, it's more expensive, and that's, when we were working this piece of legislation, DJS's concern was the delta between renewable natural gas and natural gas. So there is a caveat built right into this bill that we didn't even give them a percentage. We said, if for some reason you feel like the delta is too great, don't move forward. All we're asking that you do is annually just take a look. Just look to see if there's an availability. And what that does, Delegate, is it really spurs the industry to say, well, look, if we can get up the quantity and we can reduce the price, then we know the state is going to step in and procure it. So this is really just an enabling bill to kind of incentivize the industry to grow.
So when I was in local government, you were required basically to choose the lowest responsive bidder. Is that the case with state, or does state have flexibility to not?
Depends on what they're procuring. We have passed legislation in the past that allows them to have a delta, especially like if they're procuring products that have recyclable content in them sometimes.
Okay, so this bill allows that delta?
This bill leaves it up to the Department of General Services to determine whether the prices, because you're going to find natural gas prices will fluctuate from time to time. So this bill basically leaves it up to them to say if there's not a distinguishable difference, or if it's a small difference, that they have the right to move forward and purchase.
All right, and for the doctor on the end here, the landfills, gas recapture, that's not a requirement in Maryland, right? Because I think a lot of landfills are still flaring the gas.
Right, so requirement to collect and flare, not a requirement to produce
reuse.
electricity off of it, or put it into renewable natural gas or use it for heat. So this would facilitate that because we have biogas right now that's not being utilized.
Is there a reason we're flaring it versus using it? Is it just a cost factor or what?
Yeah, go ahead.
But in some cases, there just isn't the infrastructure. So if the landfill is remote and they're capturing it. In some cases, many landfills will just run a generator to provide, like, let's say, electricity, but they don't have the infrastructure to connect. Now, I will say there are many landfills, to your point, that they're not capturing it at all. And even best case scenario, you're looking at about a 60% capture rate. Whereas if you divert it on the front end, you have like a 98% capture rate. So by diverting it on the front end, it's a much more scientific way than just combining it and trying to capture it in the landfill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, I believe this concludes this panel. We have Brian Quinn. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. I just wanted to, Brian Quinn, on behalf of Planet Found Energy Development, here in support of House Bill 1417, want to respond to Delegate Frazier-Hidalgo's question and tell you a little bit about a digester on a farm that's located in the state of Maryland. It's in Pocomoke City on a farm down there. It was started back in 2012 when some scientists and business entrepreneurs got together with a local farmer, tried to come up with a digester that could somehow digest poultry litter. You heard about DAFT, that's another type of poultry waste. This is poultry litter. This is the feedstock process by Planet Found is called broiler litter. It's chicken litter, feathers, spilled feed. It constitutes the majority of the litter produced on the eastern shore of Maryland. That's why this project is such a good match for the location that it's in. The project was studied after it was constructed. It was studied by that same University of Maryland professor you just heard from, and her conclusions were that the project was a success and sustainable. And what's good about Planet Found, what it's doing now today, it's using some of the digestate, turning it into nutrient-rich soil conditioner under the name Old Castle. So I don't know how many of you are gardeners, but if you can find this type of soil conditioner, it's really good, and it's sold up and down the East Coast. So it's just wanted to give you an example of what a bill like this could continue to support. And the good news is my clients in the process, they started small and they're upscaling, make sure the technology worked, and they're in the process of scaling this project up. I just wanted to tell you about it, and I appreciate the time. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions. I do believe we have two unfavorables. Molly Aramis.
Thank you, Chair Wilson. Members of the committee, my name is Molly Armis. I'm with the organization Friends of the Earth. I'm here on behalf of them as well as our members and supporters here in Maryland. We do oppose this bill and respectfully request an unfavorable report. Biogas produced from animal waste relies on concentrated animal feeding operations, so really large industrial facilities combining large amounts of animals, producing large amounts of waste, and that waste needs to be managed in a liquid form, which is the most methane emitting form as well as the most environmentally hazardous. CAFOs cause a lot of public health and environmental issues for the communities that live closest, and biogas actually generates additional environmental and public health concerns like increased ammonia emissions. Often it demands new fossil fuel infrastructure, so laying new pipelines in order to inject it into, or if there's not a nearby pipeline, trucking it, so causing wear and tear on local infrastructure. Digestate, that byproduct that is left over, is highly concentrated, so high nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and it's also more soluble. So when it is land applied, there's an increased risk of running off into nearby waterways, which often already are struggling with nutrient pollution. One last thing we want to note, a big concern is the fact that since poultry is the largest livestock sector here in Maryland, poultry litter naturally emits low levels of methane, so you have to add water to it. So you're creating novel methane emissions to create a gas that burns and pollutes just like fossil gas. This is not clean energy. This is not a good use of taxpayer dollars. This exacerbates environmental injustice. And again, we respectfully ask for an unfavorable report.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
No questions. We'll go to the unfavorable and virtual. No? Okay. This hearing. We have one more, I'm sure, extraordinary brief hearing. Does it bring it up? You have a panel, sir? Yes. Yes, sir.
My hearings are brief, Mr. Chair.
I apologize.
You know my hearings are brief. You know that, right? All right, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to introduce House Bill 1419. This bill is a little bit late on the agenda just because it was a lot of moving parts. House Bill 1419 is an extension of the Drive Act that we passed last year. Just some cleanup language. The Drive Act, as you remember, established the PSC to establish TOUs, V2Gs, and VPPs. So what this bill does is it just has a little bit of cleanup language. I think the big piece of the bill that's important for the committee to know, what's struck from the bill is the regulatory asset part of the legislation is no longer part of this legislation. That's the really big piece that's changed, so no longer is considered a regulatory asset. So it can't be paid for by utilities. And then a couple of amendments to follow is the Public Service Commission shall evaluate energy storage systems enacted in other states. Just kind of helps to move what we did last year along a little bit more quickly. Also, it establishes that an aggregator of battery storage behind the meter is not considered a generator, which I think is important for clarification for the industry to help jumpstart and move this more quickly. And finally, per Potomac Edison, it establishes that the PSC and a generator can use telematics to help move this along, because some of our utilities don't have smart meters, Potomac Edison being one of them. They can still implement this, but this just allows them to do it through the use of telematics, as opposed to spending hundreds of millions of dollars on smart meters, which they'll probably have to do at some point anyway. And that's really the extension of the bill. That's the whole bill. It's pretty simple, just some cleanup language. There's nothing groundbreaking.
All right. And good afternoon, Chair Wilson, Vice Chair Crosby, and members of the committee. My name is Thad Cully with Sunrun. We're the nation's largest provider of solar plus storage services. Have about over 1 million customers. 135,000 of those have batteries, and that's growing. And 20,000 of those are participating in what the delegate mentioned, VPPs, virtual power plants. That's where we aggregate the batteries and operate them like a power plant to help reduce peak demand. I will flag one activity we did this last summer with BG&E. We operated 3 Ford F-150 Lightnings, which are massive batteries on wheels, to provide peak reduction and take homes essentially offline during those peaks, earning revenue for the customers. So that's essentially what DER aggregators do. They're creating additional value for customers, helping deploy these technologies. And for those reasons, we support the amendments that would clarify that DER aggregators are not electric companies or electric suppliers. They certainly are still subject to commission oversight as participants in commission-approved programs, and look forward to actually very much look forward to these programs being launched and helping to solve some of the problems that are facing Maryland.
Okay, seeing no questions, that concludes this hearing, and it does conclude these bill hearings. We've got everybody. Please hold fast. We're going to get into a voting session briefly, so